Well, COVID-19 vaccine mandates right here in New York City could soon be coming to an end. In a new interview with the Daily News, Mayor Eric Adams expressed optimism that jabs will no longer be required for indoor spaces, and an announcement may be coming in the next few weeks. Brian, we'll talk about the implications for the Brooklyn Nets in just a bit, because we were talking about Kyrie Irving, how he hasn't been able to play the home games because he's not vaccinated. But I do think this points to a broader trend that we have been seeing. Earlier in Worldview, we were talking about London lifting the vaccine, the mask mandates, the UK's limiting the quarantine that's necessary, even if you test positive for COVID. If you look at here in the US, you've got cities like Boston, Philly, and DC who have already lifted the requirement to show proof of vaccination. It feels like things are moving in that direction, but it's still, at least the cautious side of me says, are we finally there where we don't have to do all this?
Yeah, well, I mean, we showed the COVID chart just now in the state of New York, and knowing that Omicron hit New York particularly hard and particularly early compared to other parts of the country, now we're looking at new cases pacing at around 500, 600 a day, which is almost at early November of last year levels. And we've gotten over the hump. And that doesn't mean it was without pain. A lot of people got sick and people still died. But at the end of the day, this is kind of directionally where we were headed anyway with the changes to the mask mandates. I think it was to be expected that at least in New York City seemed to be one of the more stringent jurisdictions on COVID restrictions, now starting to lift or maybe lifting in the coming weeks, at least as is hinted by these remarks from the mayor, that vaccine mandate as well. But I mean, look, just anecdotally, Akiko, I've noticed that places I've been to lately, in addition to the mask wearing, even the vaccine checks, which are still mandated now, I've noticed have been a little bit looser in some places.
Yeah, I think people are starting to feel a little more comfortable. Now, let's talk about the sports implication of all this, Brian, because the skeptic in me says, well, we're almost to the NBA playoffs. The Nets aren't necessarily in contention. Bring back Kyrie for a home game.
First of all, they're still in the play-in tournament for right now. But yes, this vaccine mandate change would allow Kyrie to play in the home games, which he hadn't been doing through most of this season, actually all of this season so far. Obviously him, Ben Simmons coming into the rotation at some point after that blockbuster trade with Philadelphia coming in. That's going to be big as well. And actually the timing of all this could be such that Kyrie ends up playing in home games the same time. Maybe Ben Simmons brings that introduction. But of course, next to Kevin Durant, we'll see. Me personally, I just want to say I really would have liked to see Kyrie get vaccinated, and instead of that turn into the big media sensation that it did. It was the responsible thing to do, but he understood the risks. That's what he's decided to do. And that's now that the city's opening up, apparently that's going to be part of the new Brooklyn Nets rotation. So as a Nets fan, I embrace it, but I do hope that he gets the jab at some point. Just saying.
Yeah, and I think that's the hope. Ultimately, it wasn't necessarily about going, well, number one, misinformation is one thing, but to really encourage people who haven't been vaxxed to actually go out and get the jabs. You do wonder, though, Brian, the longer this continues, and I mean the longer as in the restrictions that are in place, a lot of not just Mayor Adams, but a lot of leaders, not just in the U.S., but across the world, looking at the economic impact and how much of a jolt they can get once some of these restrictions are lifted. I mean, still to be determined, but that's certainly got to be part of the factor, too.
Yeah, absolutely. But of course, a story that we will continue to be watching on that front.